Okay, so this is going to be the midterm review lecture. So these slides are going to be included in the next part of the assignment, so you can go through them on your own and ask any questions in the comments or in the lecture. So you can use this to study. You can also use it when you take the midterm. You can have them up to review. So I'm going to go through and point out the things that I want you to take a look at and review some of the key concepts that you are going to need to know. Okay, so for chapter one, the main thing that we went over in chapter one are the 4 types of research: basic research, applied research, evaluation research, and action research. So basic research is aimed at getting general knowledge, developing theory that is about learning theory, or fundamental ideas. Whereas applied research is concerned with practical questions, understanding how events work in real life. So for instance, if you were doing applied research, and applied research might be looking at a particular curriculum in a school setting to see the effectiveness there, or looking at probably even better would be like a particular teaching strategy, looking at at the effectiveness of that strategy. And so then when we have program evaluation, 2 types there, and there's a lot of different details in the chapter about some different ways that you might do that. And then action research focused on solving problems at the practitioner level. So this is where the teacher or the practitioner is the researcher themselves in their own setting. So it's similar to applied research in that it is practical questions, but action research is completely local, whereas applied research will have findings that are generalizable or could help people in other places. Okay, so chapter 2, we got an overview of quantitative, qualitative, and mixed research design. So in here too, and I think that it will be helpful to go back and take a look at this chapter now after we did chapter on experimental design and quasi-experimental, to go back and see some of this. So the main thing you need to know about experimental research is that it can help find evidence or determine and demonstrate cause and effect relationships because it is so controlled. So here they talked also about the variables. Independent variable is the treatment or the strategy, whatever is being tested, and the dependent variable is how you measure it. And we've read several chapters about this, so this should make a lot of sense now. The strongest experimental designs have random assignment, where the participants are randomly assigned to either the control group or the experimental group. And then also coming back to another topic that we've been going over for the past couple weeks: extraneous variables and confounding variables. So extraneous variables are any factor that, and I'm sorry if this is covered, but you can see it in the next part below. An extraneous variable is any variable that could interact with the independent variable. Things like age, things like income level, things like experiences, extracurriculars. So anything that could impact the independent variable. But the confounding variable is when it is not controlled for, and therefore it does have a differential impact on the dependent variable. And so to control, we've gone through a lot of different controls, and there's more details about that. Random assignment is one way to do that in experimental. Now, in non-experimental research, we're not manipulating the independent variable. So sometimes it is called like correlational. So you're trying to figure out, is there evidence that there's a correlation or some type of relationship between groups? So one thing that I do want you to study is the correlation coefficient, which is something that you will see, and hopefully you'll see this in your article critiques when we do the quantitative article critiques. So the farther they are from 0, or correlation coefficients are in between 0 and 1. And so the or they are to 1 or -1, the stronger they are. So here's two examples, a positive 65 hundredths and then a negative 71 hundredths. Now, the positive and the negative tells you the direction. It doesn't tell you about the strength. So even though this is a negative correlation coefficient, this is a stronger relationship than this because 71 hundredths is closer to -1 than 65 hundredths is to +1. So you can practice some of those to make sure that you know the strongest correlation coefficient. So this chart is here for you too, just to see some of the different components that you need to keep in mind with non-experimental research. And you can use this to kind of go back into the text and see any of these that you need to read up on. And then the next part of this chapter talked about the main approaches for qualitative design. So there's many different approaches and sub-approaches within these, and we are going to spend some time going through these in the next part of the semester. But ethnography, where the researcher is becoming immersed in a culture, narrative inquiry, where they are focusing on having their participants tell a narrative or a story about their experience and then using that. Phenomenology, when they are trying to capture the essence of a certain type of phenomenon. Maybe it's like a harp player. And so phenomenology of becoming a harp player, understanding what all that is like. So ethnography and phenomenology. Ethnography is trying to understand a culture. Like maybe in ethnography of a particular school, you want to know all about the culture, whereas phenomenology is the essence of a particular like life event or experience, like even the phenomenology of being a teacher. So it's related to some type of identity or occupation, something like that. Grounded theory is a qualitative approach where the researchers collect the data, they analyze it iteratively, and then out of those data, they come up with their findings and their theory. So grounded theory is intended to develop theory as opposed to starting with theory, which many qualitative and quantitative approaches do. And then case study, focusing in on a particular person or a school or a classroom to get a close look at a specific phenomenon. So here you can read up on those different qualitative research methods that are on that chart. And then, of course, mixed research, making sure that you have paired the qualitative and quantitative components are complementary and don't have overlapping weaknesses. Okay, so then we had a chapter on how to critically review the literature. So one thing that I want you to focus your attention on is the difference between a statement of purpose and the research question. So in a quantitative study, the statement of purpose is going to identify the type of relationships that's being investigated and the exact variables, whereas a qualitative is intended to explore or understand the same phenomenon. Now, research questions will differ, and in a mixed research, the research question could be the same because many questions can be answered with both qualitative and quantitative data. Okay, now ethics. This should be really really strong for everyone because that city training really went into depth. But here is a little chart of some of the guidelines that researchers need to keep in mind when they're working with people. And then here are just the next slides go into depth, some of them like freedom to withdraw, confidentiality, and then anonymity. So you can review those. Okay, and then chapter 7, we went into standardizing measurement and assessments that are used. So identifying a good test or a good assessment is so important when you want to make sure that your data and your findings are reflecting something that is true. So reliability is making sure that in this assessment or measurement, whatever you're using is consistent. It is getting the same results every time. So the measure that you are using is reliable. You can rely on it to give you the true accurate data every time. And then validity is the accuracy of the inferences or interpretations that we make from the test score. And so in this chapter, they talked about the different methods and evidence that is used to determine reliability and validity. So reliability is empirically determined. And again, you need to know about the reliability coefficient. Same thing as a correlation coefficient in terms of the stronger it is, it'll be closer to 1. So 1 is perfectly reliable. And so when we are determining whether or not a measure or assessment is reliable, we want that coefficient to be 7/10 or higher. And so here are some of the different methods that you can use to determine the reliability. And these are all subheadings in the chapter if you want to go over that. Now, validity. So several of those is to understand the construct, and making sure that it accurately reflects that construct. So you can be looking at the internal structure. Is it measuring more than one or just one or multiple dimensions? The factor analysis tells the number of dimensions that you are going to have. And this chart again goes into validity and the different sources of evidence that you can use to determine validity. So you can use this to guide your studying as well. So chapter 8, the methods of data collection. So 6 major methods of data collection using tests, those evaluations and measurements that are covered in chapter 7, questionnaires, chapter 9, so watch that video, interviews, focus groups, observations, existing and constructed secondary data. So make sure that you could think of an example of these and you know those 6 major methods of data collection. I also want you to take a look at the difference between data collection methods and your research design. So research design would be qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods research. And then within that, you need to choose a data collection method that is consistent with your overall design. Okay, so on to sampling in each of the different designs, quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. So sampling is how you get your participants who are going to be in the study. And the goal is to get a representatives in general. The goal is to get a representative sample if you want to generalize those findings to the population. So there's many different non-random sampling techniques, and you can review those in the chapter as well. One that I wanted to point out to you here was about quota sampling versus this stratified random sampling. So quota sampling is if, let's say that the researcher wants 6 girls and 6 boys. So once they have 6 girls and 6 boys, they have their sample. But in stratified random sampling, that is when they have categories. So they might have a category of teachers, parents, students, principals. So they have these categories and then they do random sampling within those categories. And in qualitative research, it's mostly purposive sampling, where they are looking for something purposeful. So they're looking for participants who maybe have taught for 5 to 10 years, have taught in a rural school, and have taught at the same school for 5 years or longer, and who teach 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. So it's very purposeful in terms of they have these requirements that participants have to have, and then they find participants that meet those criteria. Here. Okay. And then chapter 11 is thinking about the validity of research results. So the chapter 7 is about reliability and validity of a measure that you are using as part of a study. And then chapter 10 is about reliability and validity of the actual study that is being conducted. So reliability is, could it be repeated in another instance? And then validity is how correct or accurate are the findings in regards to the data that was collected. So here are some of the criteria for inferent causation. There has to, of course, be a relationship between the independent and the dependent variable, or there might not be a relationship, and that's still a finding too. In order for it to be causation, the change has to start at the independent variable before the dependent variable to make sure, so that that order has to be in place. But if it's ambiguous, that means that you're unable to figure out if the dependent variable caused the independent variable, or if the independent variable caused the dependent variable. So for this, and then here, of course, we have the impact of confounding extraneous variables. So of course, that's where all of the controls come in. So here is another review on extraneous variables and confounding variables. And then here, I put in this chart, these are all of the threats to internal validity. So for this chapter, I want you to focus in on what are the threats to internal validity, and then the threats to external validity. So again, what I was talking about, when you can't tell the order, history, same thing. Well, I did that in the review question for the announcements this week. So here are the items that you need to focus on here for the threats to internal validity. And then external validity, is it generalizable to different settings, different times? And so again, here are the things that you need to keep in mind and look for in terms of any potential threats to external validity. Okay, and so on to experimental research, weak and strong design. So weak experimental design does not control for many or any extraneous confounding variables, whereas strong experimental design is able to identify and control most of the extraneous confounding variables. So these are the parts of experimental design. You have the experimental group who gets the treatment, which is the independent variable, and then the control group does not, but both of them are measured on the dependent variable to see if there is a difference on that dependent variable. So here is another visual about strong designs. All have random assignment, and here are some of the different types that you could use along with random assignment to control for those extraneous confounding variables. So this goes back to, we had a question about this last week. Analysis of covariance is a statistical technique that researchers can use to equate groups that differ on a pretest. So that is a way to equal the groups and control for any potential difference that could come up there. And then here is another visual about ways to control for confounding variables. So assignment, of course, random assignment is the best control technique. Matching is another one where you're not randomly assigning participants, but you're assigning them in a way to where they are reflective of each other. Keeping the variables constant, incorporating the variables into the design. If there's an extraneous variable, sometimes researchers might just make that another independent variable. Having the covariance, the statistical control or counterbalancing when you are using the repeated measures. And then lastly, chapter 13, quasi-experimental research. And a quasi-experimental research is often used when it's not possible to use random assignment. And you are not able, but you're not able to get full control because of that issue. And since you don't have full control, back. So it's really important in quasi-experimental design that researchers are searching for alternative hypotheses for why there is a difference. So again, ways to control for confounding variables in quasi-experimental design. These are the ones that we went over last week. So here you can see the ideas that you can do here. Regression discontinuity design, interrupted time series design, and non-equivalent control group designs. Okay, so these are the review slides. So if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, or maybe even a tip, if there's a way that you remember any of these, you can put that either in the lecture part or in the slides part down below. And there are also review questions, and the review questions and the multiple choice questions are very similar to the ones that are on the actual midterm. So I tried to choose questions that are reflective of the topics that are going to be on the midterm. So you can use that to study, use these to study, and use both on the midterm. So I look forward to seeing your comments, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.